At 9:02 a.m. on August 27, 1896, the Royal Navy opened fire on a palace in Zanzibar. By 9:40, it was over. 38 minutes, the shortest war in recorded history. And when the smoke cleared, a sultan was running for his life, and an island sultanate had lost its independence forever. Today, we're looking at how a mysterious death, a stubborn prince, and a single line in a forgotten treaty triggered the shortest war ever fought. Like and subscribe quickly before we dive in. Let's go back to Zanzibar in the 1890s, a small island off the coast of East Africa and one of the wealthiest trading hubs in the region. Spices, ivory, and for generations, one of the largest slave markets in the world. Its sultans had grown rich and powerful, rich enough to build a waterfront palace complex that included the House of Wonders, said to be the first building in East Africa with electric lights. But by 1896, that power was an illusion. Europe was carving up Africa, and Britain and Germany both wanted the East African coast. In 1890, they made a deal. Germany took the mainland territories. Britain took Zanzibar, declaring it a protectorate. The Sultan kept his palace, his title, and his flag. He also signed away one thing that seemed small at the time. From now on, no one could become Sultan without the approval of the British consul. Remember that clause. In 6 years, it would burn a palace to the ground. On the morning of August 25, 1896, Sultan Hamad bin Thuwaini, Britain's cooperative, hand-picked ruler, suddenly died. No warning, no explanation, and within hours, before the body was even buried, his 29-year-old cousin Khalid bin Bargash moved into the palace and claimed the throne. Some suspected Khalid had poisoned him. It was never proven, but the timing raised eyebrows across the island, and it raised alarms at the British consulate because Khalid had skipped one step. He never asked for British approval. The British consul, Basil Cave, warned him to stand down. Khalid had actually tried to seize the throne once before, 3 years earlier, and backed off when the British pushed. Everyone expected him to back off again. This time, he didn't. Instead, Khalid barricaded himself inside the palace and called every fighter he could find. By the end of the day, he had around 2,800 men, palace guards, armed servants, and hundreds of ordinary civilians. He had Maxim machine guns, a Gatling gun, a bronze cannon from the 17th century, and 2 modern field guns, a personal gift from the German Kaiser. He aimed all of it at the harbor. He even had a navy, one ship, the Glasgow, a wooden royal yacht built for his father in 1878. At 3 p.m., just 30 minutes after his cousin's funeral, Khalid's guns fired a royal salute. He proclaimed himself Sultan of Zanzibar. The British refused to recognize him. Cave telegraphed London with a careful question. If peace failed, was he authorized to fire on the palace? The answer came back from the government of Lord Salisbury. You are authorized to adopt whatever measures you may consider necessary and will be supported in your action by Her Majesty's government. And the Royal Navy started gathering. By August 26th, 5 British warships sat in Zanzibar Harbor, guns facing the palace. That afternoon, Rear Admiral Harry Rawson delivered an ultimatum. Haul down your flag and leave the palace by 9 a.m. tomorrow, or we open fire. That night, the island held its breath. The American consul wrote, "The silence which hung over Zanzibar was appalling. Usually drums were beating or babies cried, but that night there was absolutely not a sound." At 8 o'clock the next morning, Khalid sent a messenger asking to negotiate. Cave's answer was simple: agree to the terms or nothing. At 8:30, Khalid sent his final reply. "We have no intention of hauling down our flag, and we do not believe you would open fire on us." He was calling their bluff. Cave sent back one last warning. "We do not want to open fire, but unless you do as you are told, we shall certainly do so." At 8:55, the flagship raised the signal, "Prepare for action." At 9 o'clock exactly, the ultimatum expired. 2 minutes later, 3 British warships opened fire simultaneously. The very first shell knocked out one of Khalid's field guns, and the shots kept coming. The palace was built of wood. Inside were nearly 3,000 people, sheltering behind barricades of crates and rubber bales. Against high-explosive naval shells, none of it mattered. Within minutes, the palace was on fire, and Khalid's artillery was being silenced, gun by gun. At 9:05, the Glasgow, the Sultan's wooden yacht, did something almost unbelievable. It opened fire on a British cruiser. The response sank it in minutes. The harbor was so shallow that its masts stayed above the water, where they would remain for years. Its crew raised a British flag in surrender, and British sailors rowed out and rescued every one of them. And Khalid, a Reuters correspondent, reported that he fled at the very first shot, slipping out a back exit, while his followers kept fighting. Other accounts say he held on longer. Either way, while shells rained down on the men defending his throne, the man who claimed it was gone. At 9:40, the palace flag came down and the guns went quiet. The war was over. Britain had fired roughly 500 shells, 4,100 machine gun rounds, and 1,000 rifle rounds. Around 500 Zanzibaris were dead or wounded, most of them killed by the fire that consumed the wooden palace. British casualties? One sailor wounded. He recovered. By that same afternoon, the British had installed their preferred candidate, Hamud bin Mohammed, as Sultan. On paper, Zanzibar still had a ruler. In reality, he answered to London. The Sultanate that had once commanded trade across the East African coast would spend the next 67 years under British control. It never rebelled again. 38 minutes. That's what it took to end an empire's independence. But Khalid's story wasn't over. He and about 40 followers reached the German consulate, and Germany, Britain's imperial rival, refused to hand him over. British forces surrounded the building, waiting to arrest him the moment he stepped onto Zanzibari soil. So the Germans made sure he never did. Weeks later, a German warship arrived, and at high tide, one of its boats rowed right up to the consulate's garden gate. Khalid stepped directly from the consulate into the boat, technically never touching Zanzibar, and sailed away to German East Africa, a free man. The British finally caught him 20 years later during World War I. He was exiled and died in Mombasa in 1927, having been Sultan for exactly 2 days. Afterwards, Britain forced Khalid's supporters to pay reparations of 300,000 rupees, calculated to cover, among other things, the cost of the shells fired at them. The losers were billed for their own bombardment. One more thing, even the 38 minutes is disputed, and not the way you'd expect. The British ship's own logbooks couldn't agree on when the fighting stopped. Depending on where you mark the start and which ship's log you trust, the war lasted 38, 40, or 45 minutes. History's shortest war was so short that the people fighting it lost track of the timing. If there's a silver lining, it's this. Within months, under British pressure, the new Sultan abolished slavery in Zanzibar. The market that had fueled the island's wealth for generations was finally shut down. The Anglo-Zanzibar War captures an entire era in a single morning, an empire so powerful it could end a nation's independence before lunch, and a ruler who gambled everything on the belief that they wouldn't dare pull the trigger. He was wrong by 9:02. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like if you learned something new. Remember to subscribe for more incredible stories and historical facts.